Thank you so much, President-elect Maui. That was a great introduction. I would hope that you send me a copy of it so that I can use it again. That was pretty good. And certainly to President Davis, President-elect Maui, and to my fellow Rotarians, we greet you on behalf of the Chattanooga Rotary Downtown Chapter, uh, President Elaine Swafford. It's a pleasure to be here today. It's an honor. This is the second time I've been to Louisiana. I was stationed at Fort Polk, where I received some infantry training, and I'll tell you, I spent 20 years in Louisiana one night, and but I'm glad to be back under these circumstances. But it's a pleasure to come and just chat a little bit, and I hope you don't mind if I just kind of roam around or ramble around these topics related to diversity, and it's a topic that we hear so much about today. And there's a lot of information and a lot of discussion that we could cover, but let me just jump into it. I know we're going to have a Q&A later, but understand that I am absolutely interruptible. And I'm going to hit on a number of things because we have such a short window of time to chat with one another. Again, President-elect Maui mentioned some of the awards and recognition, and I'm very fortunate at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee to the 7,000 plus employees that we have. And I see diversity and inclusion, first of all, as a team effort. And I have the pleasure of being the face of it, but the work is done from top down at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee. We understand that we can no longer afford or that we can ill afford to be corporately, culturally illiterate because our world is changing. And our world is changing no longer at an evolutionary pace, which is a slow, gradual, naturistic change, but it's changing at a revolutionary pace, which is quick change. And I think you understand that because if you look around and you in Louisiana and other places, you recognize that the world no longer looks like it looked even 5 years ago. The fact of the matter is, if you could shrink the world, if you could shrink the world to a village of 100 people with all other human ratios remaining exactly the same, and you could shrink our world to just a village of 100 people, it would look something like this. Of those 100, 60 would be Asians, 12 would be Europeans, five would be Americans, eight would be Latin Americans, 14 would be Africans, one would be a Pacific Islander, 51 would be female, 49 would be male, 82 would be non white, 18 would be white, 89 would be heterosexual, 11 would be members of the GLBTQ community, 33 would be Christians, 67 would be non Christians, 21 would be Muslims, 15 would be Hindu, 6 would be Buddhist, 5 would be animist, 6 would believe in other religions, and 14 of that 100 would be atheists. 15 would speak Chinese, Mandarin. 7 would speak English. 6 would speak Hindi. 6 would speak Spanish. 5 would speak Russian. 4 would speak Arabic. 3 would speak Bengali. 2 would speak Portuguese, and other languages would be Indonesian, Japanese, German, French, and some other languages. 20 would be undernourished, and 15 would be overweight. One would be dying from starvation, and six people would own 59% of the world's wealth. And all six of those people would live in the United States. 80 would live in substandard housing. 24 would have electricity. 67 would be unable to read. One would have a college education, and only seven would have access to the internet. One would have HIV, one would be near death, and one would be a newborn. So you see, we our world is a lot different than our neighborhoods, and our world is becoming impacted certainly at a global level. And it's important that we understand that because in your businesses, in your communities, in your chapter of the Rotary, and in all of your dealings with other people, you can ill afford. to be culturally illiterate. And so many times when we talk about this work, I'm going to be honest, President Davis, I don't use the word diversity too much, simply because everybody seems to have his or her own definition of what that means. And with such a variety of definitions, it often leads to some head bumping, if you will. And so I think there needs to be some consistency in what that word means. And so I've chosen not to use it very much. And as I say, as I speak, and even at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee, uh, they know that I feel that diversity is organic. I have absolutely nothing to do with diversity. If you have two of anything, you have diversity. Ronald Harris does not impact diversity in any way unless he's one of the two. But outside of that, I have no control over diversity. Inclusion is intentional when you have to think inclusively to be inclusive. And many times, and too often, in our desires to be inclusive, we have an exclusive mentality. I'll come back to that later. But finally, if diversity is organic and inclusion is intentional, then cultural competency has to be imperative. As you could tell by the stats that I read, our world is changing. Many of you are business owners, and many of you are leaders in your community, and I know you are. And so it's important that we look at this whole area of diversity or inclusion, or whatever you want to call it now, as being an imperative. It's something that's a must do, it's a requirement. Our world is changing. Can't afford to be corporately illiterate. And I want to challenge you today. Let me throw out a challenge on the front end, and I'll do it on the back end as well, because I think it's important. As a result of today, I want you to do something for me. I want you to find someone where you can honor the story of someone different than yourself. It's important to find someone and you can honor their story, but they have to be different than yourself. And so when we talk about this work, it's difficult work. It's HARD work, but it's also HEART work, because race and gender does matter. It does matter. I think President Davis heard me say in Chattanooga. I was speaking in New York one year, and a guy came up to me later, uh, told me how much he enjoyed the presentation, for which I was certainly pleased at that. And then he went on to confess to me. He said, "Mr. Harris, I just want you to know that I don't see color. I don't see color." And I looked at him because I was puzzled. And I said to him, "Well, if you don't see color, I don't want to ride with you anywhere, because we might come to some traffic lights. And if you don't see color, it's not going to be a good day for us. Because, and the other side of that is, if you don't see this, then you are invalidating to a great degree who I am. It's not the most important piece of me. You won't find much profundity in it, but it is a primary dimension of who I am." And he went on to say to me, "No, no, 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 I didn't mean it that way." He said, "What I meant was, you just happen to be black." And again, I was puzzled and I had to correct him. I said, "No, I didn't just happen to be. I came from a long line of black people. My parents were black and my grandparents were black. It didn't just happen." And I understood what he was trying to say, but what I was trying to say to him is that race and gender does matter. But sometimes we get bogged down and don't want to move beyond race and gender, but we have to, because there are other dimensions of who we are that matter. Age matters. Age matters. It's important that we understand that a baby girl, for example, born today can expect to live to be 105. The average age now is 64. Some of you here just got younger. The average age is now 64. And it's really speaks to who we are, because this is the first time generationally in the workforce that we have what I call 4.5 generations in the workforce. Young people born today, young people coming into the workforce today were born. Listen, young people coming into the workforce today were born, born in 1999. It's interesting to me. They never saw Larry Bird play basketball. They never saw Magic Johnson play basketball. Popcorn has always been microwavable. And so we're all impacted generationally. And some of you understand that when you call your children or grandchildren on the phone, they don't answer. But when you text them, you get an immediate answer. It matters. Our socioeconomic conditions matter. It's a part of who we are. The fastest growing rate of homelessness, and some of you know this, it impacts women and children socioeconomically. There's a pay gap still existing between men and women. Our socioeconomic status matters. Our religion matters, simply because we're now involved and engaged with people who don't think like we think. They're not from where we're from. And all of those things matter. And so we have to be ready to engage those who don't look like us, or nor do they think like us. Many times now, I'm jumping around because I got a short window of time, but I want to hit on some things that are very important to who we are. Very important to who we are, even as we think about the conversations around unconscious bias. We talk about bias a lot. We talk about the diversity issues and that face us, and we've seen them. 2020 uh, expose so much incivility, and I think part of that is because we let differences impact our communication or lack of communication. And I understand that one of the most important things that we could ever do is engage in productive communication. That's the problem we really face when we start dealing with these issues of diversity. So many times people come to me and they think they have an issue of race and they have an issue of gender and so on and so forth. But what they really have is an issue that impacts a lack of communication. And if we don't talk to one another, if we don't talk to one another without trying to read our biographies into other people's lives, it creates a problem. It creates a problem. And all of us, every single one of us, bring some bias to the table. And bias is really not about good and bad people. Many people use the term bigotry and bias interchangeably. I submit to you they're not the same, because we all have some bias and we all come with it. It's not about good and bad people. And let me give you an example. I like to be a little bit interactive, and I want you to indulge me just for a moment. Just for a moment, I'm going to ask everyone to close their eyes. I'm going to ask all of you just for a moment to close your eyes. And I'm going to describe a scenario to you. And then we'll talk about it on the other side. There's a car, and the car has several occupants. Keep your eyes closed. And the car is speeding down the street. The car is just barreling down the street. The music is blaring. The car is jumping and thumping. The music is loud, it's blaring. The car is speeding. And suddenly the blue lights come on behind it. And it pulls the car over. The officers pull the car over. Officers get out of the car. Open your eyes. And let me ask a question, and you can put it in the chat or you can just save it to our Q&A. But I want you to be honest here because I want to know how many people were in the car you saw. I'm just going to pause there for a moment. I want you to think about it. How many people were in the car? And then the next part of that question is what type of music was blaring in the car? What was the music you heard? And finally, what was the race and gender of the police officer? What was the race and gender of the police officer? How many people were in your car and what type of music was playing? Typically, when I do that, no one ever tells me, and maybe some of you uh, will have had a response this way, but most people will tell me there were four people in the car and that the music was either rock or rap and that the police officer was a white male. And I always raise the question, why didn't you see four nuns playing gospel music and the police officer was a Chinese female? Maybe some of you saw that. Most people don't. We don't see people as they are, we see them as we are. And we look at our exposures and our experiences. And most of the time, when we have a similar scenario, then the occupants of the car are black, the music is rap, and the police officer is white, and a white male at that. But I guarantee you there's some nuns somewhere who've been stopped for speeding and playing loud gospel music. I guarantee you there's a Chinese police officer somewhere in America. It's not about good and bad people. It's just about our biases. And we become biased uh, in a number of ways. Our families, our values, our experiences, television, so on and so forth. And so when we talk about these whole issues of diversity, I just want to tell you, if you're going to do this work effectively, you're going to have to learn to suspend your right to become offended if you're going to be effective. Let me do it again because I think that's an important piece. You have to suspend your right to become offended if we're going to be effective and close some of these communication gaps and close and rid ourselves of some of this incivility that seems to permeate our world right now, our country, our state, even our neighborhoods. Got to learn how to talk to each other. Got to learn to let people bump us around a little bit here and there if we're going to be effective. And that's going to take leadership. It's going to take leadership. And I suspect that all of you are leaders in some capacity. I know the Rotary is a leader. And over the last 6 months, I think I've spoken to at least 7 Rotary clubs. I think I've spoken to at least 7, I'm sorry, uh, from Florida to Spokane, Washington, San Antonio, Lansing, Michigan, and it seems like several others in between. And I think the reason for that is because everybody needs to understand and want to talk about this work that we all have a responsibility. And we can do this work, but it's going to take us working together. It's going to take the Rotary clubs working together. It's going to take our places of worship working together. Still remains true that 11 o'clock on Sunday, between 11 and 1 o'clock, is still the most segregated time in America. Our typical worship time. There's something fundamentally wrong with that. We've got to do a better job. and it's going to take organizations like the Rotary, and it's going to take organizations like Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee and Blue Cross Blue Shield of Louisiana and all these other organizations because your workforce is changing. Your workforce is changing, and we got to be prepared for it. Our world is changing. And I'll tell you, uh, let me just pause right there because what I really enjoy more than anything else is interacting uh, with the audience and really interacting with each and every one of you. So let me pause right there, uh, President-elect Maui, if you don't mind, because I would really love to do some Q and A's. So I just
I,
rambled a little bit, but let's just talk about some
well,
things.
actually, you get me President Haggai.
Oh, I'm
Um,
sorry.
oh no, that's great. If you come back in July, you'll get to see Maui doing this part of it. And if you want to put Maui on with us. That'd be
I don't
great.
want to put him on. I want you. You
Oh
know
no,
that.
it's great having Maui here with us. It's good training for him because he's going to be taking the seat soon enough.
Okay, good to see you both.
So one of the questions I had is uh, here in Baton Rouge, for example, we're 50, almost 50-50 as far as our population, as far as race, and yet it's still we struggle in this town with racism. What are some of the things that you encourage people in places to do to try and work through and get past these situations of kind of racial struggle?
Yeah, I some of the things that we've done. It exists. We were always, unfortunately, every city has its isms. Every community has its isms, race, sex, age, and all of those things are a very real part of our communities. But I think people of goodwill will learn to suspend their right to become offended and also recognize that the most effective solutions to it is our ability to sit down and talk to one another. And I get involved and I get other organizations involved, such as the Urban League and the other civic and social organizations. And they've got to be a part of the conversations. The chambers of commerce are also great organizations to get involved. And I call them small groups. Learn to deal with the story of somebody who doesn't look like you. And I don't know what the makeup of your Rotary Club is. I don't know the demographical makeup of it. But I think you can start there and allow yourself to become uncomfortable. You got to become uncomfortable. I think when we have these critical conversations, they have a historical relevance, no question about that. But if you're comfortable, these conversations should make you uncomfortable. And if you're uncomfortable, they should make you comfortable. But I think you have to have the critical conversations, not only at the organization level, but at the individual level as well. And I found organizations such as the Urban League and even some of the sororities, fraternities, the chambers of commerce. I try to engage everybody in the conversation. Uh, but you have to continue them. You have to continue them. Subsequent to the George Floyd killing, America did some interesting things. I saw in the demonstrations, and those demonstrations were multiracial, multicultural, all ages, and I was amazed at what I saw. But what happened? People had an emotional attachment to it, and organizations start trying to grab the diversity folk, and they start hiring diversity folk. And once the emotional piece of it, as long as the murder wasn't proximate, we didn't see it anymore, then we kind of went back to what was our norm when we should have continued the conversation. I'm thankful at Blue Cross that we've continued those conversations from top down. We created what we call critical conversations. Uh, and we involve everyone in these conversations. We talk about unconscious bias. We talk about the difference between racist and anti-racist, or non-racist and anti-racist. We have those conversations. We talk about those legislative opportunities, or those things that create issues for our GLBTQ community. We talk about all of those things. We talk about undoing racism, but the operative word is we talk about it. We got to keep talking. Uh, we've got to keep talking, President Davis. We've got to keep talking.
Howie, do you have a question?
Ron, one of the questions I had in regard to uh, age and younger workers coming into the workforce, and how to bridge that gap, and especially now where it looks like a lot of work in some industries can be done virtually versus, even old guys like myself who are still used to going into the office, and how best to deal with things like that.
Good. If you think it's an issue for you, look at the gray hair I have, and I just got this since COVID. Um, One of the things that I've learned, what we try to do is we address the differences in the impact of generational diversity. We try to provide training at every level because, again, this is the first time in the history of America where we have, I call it, four and a half generations in the workforce at the same time. And let me be clear about this because a lot of people get this confused a little bit. Millennials are in their 30s now. Okay. Let me do something with that because many people think the young group coming up now are millennials. They are not. That's Gen Z and the iGen generation. Millennials are in their 30s. Okay, and but we have all four. I call it four and a half generations. One I'm really afraid of. I don't know what the post-COVID generation is going to look like. I'm doing some study around that and bringing in experts to talk about that. But I think what you have to do is recognize, and what you really find as the barrier is communication, and the communication styles is what creates most of the issues in the workforce. Because boomers like me, um, we are more direct in our communication. We want face to face. We won't talk over cubicle walls. We don't talk around poles or anything like that. We do that. Gen X, and I'm sure that there's a great number of Gen X in your audience today. Gen X are email generation, and they do it because they don't trust people. So they send you emails day in and day out for any reason to maintain a paper trail. And so you have to understand the way they work, and their form of communication is email. Gen Z, Gen Y, uh, these are folk who use a lot of social media. And so you have to make sure that your organization has that. And then you have a handful of what I call veterans in there who like to have direct communication. So if there's someone who was born before 1945, you got to approach them in a whole different way, which means you don't send emails, you don't send the text messages and all of that. You have to tell them directly. It requires work, President-elect Maui. It requires a lot of work, but it's worth doing because the young folk who are at home now doing this is what they wanted to do anyway. 57% of our workforce said they don't want to come back. Okay? And as a baby boomer, I'm so tired of being in Zoom rooms. You know, I'm looking at you two guys, but I tell you, I would rather be with you.
And I can promise you, we'd rather have you here.
And I would rather be there so that I could, just lean over and talk to the president there and lean over and get that tie that you're wearing because I like ties and I haven't worn one in a year and a half now, it seems. And so the difference again goes back to the style of communication. There's a lady, and I'll throw her name out there. I don't think she'll be angry with me. Her name is Jessica Stallings, and she's the president and CEO of an organization called Regenerations, and she is phenomenal as a speaker and in terms of her data as it relates to this is all she does. She does all of this work around generational diversity. She's one of the best that I've had the pleasure of meeting. So I'm just throwing her name out there if anybody wants it. Jessica Stallings Holder is her name, and uh, if you're in the market for someone, uh, Brother President, if you're in the market for someone who can really delve into it, I recommend her.
Well, and I also want to agree with you. I have two children. One is a millennial, and the other is a Gen Z, and even the two of them communicate differently. And so, the Gen Z, it's difficult to communicate. Period. And the millennial is much more likely to either be messenger or text, but
Yeah, and
voice
the
communication
interesting
is not
thing,
important.
yeah, interesting thing is if you are 40 and you interact with a young person 25 years of age or younger, if you're over 40, that young person has more in common with someone of another race and ethnicity than they do you.
I can believe that.
Yeah.
That as far as the guy that you ran into there in New York who doesn't see color, I guess he would think Maui and I are twins. Except I'm a lot older than Maui.
that's
I'm his
that's
older
the only
brother.
difference. Listen, that's the only difference I see. But that's important because even in the conversations we have now, in our efforts to be, um, I don't know what the correct word is. I'm looking for, but in our efforts to show how nice we are and all of those things, it's still important that we recognize the uniqueness of each other. Now we get hung up on things that none of us had any responsibility for it because nobody sitting in your audience today, none of the Rotarians there chose the race that they are. You didn't have any say so in that, nor did you choose your gender, nor did you choose to not be homosexual. Nobody actually chose those things. Now we can have lively and robust discussions over lunch about the impact of those things, but the reality of those things is none of us did that. And we spend too much time talking about the things that makes us different when we have so many things in common. I haven't met anybody who doesn't want to be respected. I haven't met anyone who doesn't want to be trusted. I've never met anyone of any background who doesn't want to be communicated with. And so we can't read our biographies into other people's lives. And that's what we do most of the time to our detriment.
That's a fascinating way of putting it. That we're trying to inject our biography into other people's lives. I never really thought of it in those terms. That's awesome. And what was the name of the speaker one more time that you had mentioned? The lady's name?
Jessica Stallings, Stollling Holder. She recently got married. And she's the president and CEO of Regenerations. She's just one of the most knowledgeable, engaging people, even on Zoom and other platforms. She is just one of the most dynamic and knowledgeable people I've ever come across.
Because we had a question from Alicia Murphy. She was asking to share that so that we could maybe reach out to her as well, or at least some of our members could reach out to her.
Absolutely. And I don't often go around endorsing and doing that, but she's that the subject of generational diversity is something that she's incredibly passionate about. She has several books out on it, and she is one of the most engaging speakers that you'll ever meet.
Well, Mr. Harris, really appreciate you spending some time with us. Hope you will, when this COVID thing is over with, actually come on down to Baton Rouge, come spend some time with us. We'd love to have you at lunch and just hang out and get to know you better.
Well, you know what? I'm going to hold you to that because I have this thing about Louisiana and Cajun food. And
Oh,
so
Mesha, come on
ha-
down.
have your platinum card with you because that lunch is going to cost you big.
That's a deal. I've got you there. I got you covered.
Yeah. Thank you
Thank you
very much
again.
for your time.
Thank you guys so much. Appreciate you.
You bet.
Thank you.
All right.